In this quiet documentary, the narrative drifts back to a time long before written memory, when early human communities first encountered the gentle transformation of fruit, grain, and honey into something subtly different. It follows the slow, natural processes through which fermentation emerged, not as an invention, but as a quiet discovery shaped by warmth, time, and the soft rhythms of the ancient world. Through calm reflection, it explores how humans came to recognize this change, how it entered rituals and gatherings, and how the earliest shared drinks became woven into the long, unbroken thread of human culture. Long before written symbols marked clay tablets, and long before cities expanded into crowded valleys, the ancient landscape moved with a slow, patient rhythm. Days rose gently into soft light that washed over plains, riverbanks, and wooded edges, while evenings settled quietly, allowing cool air to drift across the earth in unbroken waves. Early human communities lived within these rhythms, guided by the movements of seasons and the gradual changes that shaped the natural world. Vegetation thickened with summer warmth, then thinned as colder winds returned. Fruits ripened and fell, grasses dried beneath quiet suns, and small clearings filled with the scent of damp leaves layered across the ground. Life unfolded in steady, unhurried patterns. In this early world, the beginnings of fermentation existed long before anyone recognized them. Warmth, moisture, and time produce slow transformations within ripening fruits, grains, and honey left undisturbed. Wild yeast floated invisibly through the air, settling upon surfaces without intention. Fruits crushed beneath the feet of animals released sweet juices that pooled in shallow depressions, left to warm beneath sunlight. Grains gathered during seasonal abundance occasionally grew damp inside woven baskets as storms passed overhead, and their tightly packed clusters softened, warmed, and shifted. Honey, when diluted by unexpected rainfall inside abandoned tree hollows, changed with the same patient rhythm. These were not inventions, but gentle natural occurrences, quiet processes that unfolded without urgency or human design. Early foragers moved through this world with attentive senses, observing subtle changes in color, scent, and texture. The forest floor carried the aroma of overripe fruits, their surfaces softened by heat and time. Birds circled above these areas, drawn to the sweetness that seeped from broken skins. Insects hovered in slow, drifting clouds above fermenting patches, while mammals investigated them with cautious curiosity. The gentle bubbling of fermenting fruit was rare, but not impossible, producing a faint sound indistinguishable from the rustling hum of warm days. These small pockets of transformation existed as part of the natural environment, unnoticed by the vast stretches of landscape that surrounded them. Over time, early humans encountered these phenomena repeatedly. Communities traveling along familiar foraging routes came upon fallen fruit whose sweetness had deepened and changed. Occasionally, such fruit carried a softened aroma that filled the air with a warmth unlike the scent of ordinary ripeness. Streams collected mixtures of berries and leaves, and in the heat of midday, these mixtures sometimes shifted in ways not immediately understood. The ancient world offered these moments quietly, in the same way it offered wind, rainfall, or the sound of distant animal calls. Nothing announced the presence of fermentation, yet the transformation waited patiently within the natural cycle. Small encampments formed near reliable sources of water, and families gathered in shaded areas during the warmest hours of the day. Smoke drifted from low fires, curling upward and disappearing into the open sky. Clay vessels, shaped by early hands from riverbank earth, dried near hearths. Woven baskets filled with gathered fruits emitted gentle scents as sunlight touched them. Every object rested within an environment where natural chemistry moved slowly in the background, unnoticed by those who lived beside it. The earliest signs of fermentation likely appeared in these simple surroundings, where the border between natural decay and gentle transformation was thin and easily crossed. As seasons repeated themselves year after year, the interaction between early humans and fermenting plants became more familiar. Perhaps a small pool of fruit left undisturbed for several days produced a scent unlike any encountered before. Sweet, slightly sharp, and warm. Perhaps a handful of softened berries tasted different from fresh ones, carrying a depth that lingered for a moment before fading. These early encounters were subtle, easily overlooked, and yet they represented the beginning of humanity's long relationship with fermented drink. Nothing dramatic signaled this moment. There was only the slow unfolding of natural processes and the gradual recognition of changes within ordinary foods. Over time, the environment itself influenced how humans approached these discoveries. Regions with heavy seasonal rainfall produced cycles of fruit abundance, followed by rapid fermentation. Warmer climates accelerated the natural process, while cooler ones slowed it. Communities living near river systems encountered mixtures of plant matter washed downstream, carrying unexpected scents that drifted across the water. In forested zones, wild honey seeped from broken combs, mixing with moisture and transforming with the same quiet consistency. These patterns unfolded across continents, forming a backdrop for the gradual emergence of intentional observation. As humans began settling more consistently in familiar areas, the world's rhythms became even more important. Camps placed near fruit-bearing trees witnessed the seasonal abundance and decay that occurred with each passing year. Grains stored in pits or baskets experienced cycles of dryness and dampness dictated by storms. Honey collected from hives sometimes lingered long enough to change on its own. Without deliberate study or experimentation, these phenomena would still have happened, continuing their gentle cycles regardless of human presence. Yet human attention slowly began to notice these subtle transformations, and with each new encounter, understanding deepened. Clay containers, though still simple and unadorned, introduced new forms of interaction with the environment. Their curved walls held mixtures of fruit or water longer than woven baskets could. When left near a fire's warmth or set aside for storage, these vessels provided conditions that allowed fermentation to occur more reliably. Early households might have discovered this by chance, returning to a forgotten jar that now carried a softened, altered aroma. Grain storage pits, carved into the earth and lined with grasses, occasionally trapped moisture beneath their layers. When grains warmed in these dark, enclosed spaces, the first hints of fermentation appeared slowly. None of this felt extraordinary in the moment. It was merely another aspect of the natural world's quiet, unhurried cycle. And so, the origins of fermentation emerged not through deliberate invention, but through long, gradual encounters shaped by environment, chance, and patient observation. The discovery came in small fragments, a taste here, a scent there, a forgotten mixture that changed over time. These early experiences formed the foundation for what would later become one of humanity's most enduring cultural practices. But in these initial moments, nothing suggested the significance this transformation would eventually hold. It existed simply as part of the Earth's slow rhythm, waiting to be recognized. In the earliest camps, daily routines unfolded with the gentle consistency of sunrise and nightfall. Fires kindled at dawn warmed the cool morning air, sending thin streams of smoke upward into a pale sky. Food-gathering groups moved outward in quiet lines, stepping across dew-soaked grass. The earth beneath their feet carried the softness of night's moisture, releasing faint aromas of soil and crushed plants. Along the forest edges, berries ripened in clusters, their surfaces reflecting small glints of morning light. Some fruits lay scattered upon the ground, softened by time and warmth, their skins broken by animals or by the simple weight of their own ripening. The scents rising from these softened fruits were not uniform. Some carried the simple sweetness of freshness turned soft. Others hinted at a deeper change, one that blended sweetness with something warmer and more complex. These scents drifted across the air in faint currents, mixing with the surrounding scents of leaves, soil, and distant water. Occasionally, early humans noticed these differences, turning their attention toward fruits whose aromas lingered more strongly. There was no understanding of why such scents differed, but the environment offered these variations without explanation. When fruits gathered in woven baskets were brought back to camp, they rested near fire-warmed areas or in shaded alcoves where the air remained still. Over several days, changes occurred in the mixtures of fruit, water, and natural yeast. Some baskets softened faster than others, producing aromas that signaled the early stages of fermentation. Clay vessels holding crushed berries formed small pockets of warmth, especially when placed near glowing embers or within sunlit spaces. People moved past these vessels each day, sensing subtle shifts in scent or texture before returning to daily tasks. The first intentional tastings of fermented liquid likely came through curiosity rather than design. A clay jar left undisturbed for days might have produced a thin layer of bubbling foam at its surface. A pool of fruit juices collected after rainfall might have thickened and deepened in flavor. A small amount of honey diluted in water might have changed its scent after resting in a shaded hollow. In each case, the transformation unfolded with patient invisibility, revealing itself only through taste or aroma. The earliest humans who consumed these altered mixtures experienced effects that were unfamiliar yet gentle. A warmth rising slowly through limbs, a soft loosening of tension, a lightness in mood. These sensations were subtle enough to be approached without fear and soothing enough to be remembered. As seasons continued their cycles, encounters with fermentation grew more frequent. Rainstorms passing overhead saturated storage baskets, causing grains to swell and soften. Warm afternoons encouraged fruit mixtures to ferment more quickly. Honey harvested from wild hives began transforming when left too long in partially sealed containers. As these patterns repeated themselves, familiarity with fermentation deepened. The process remained mysterious, yet recognizable as a natural rhythm connected to weather, warmth, and the passage of time. Communities living near riverbanks experienced fermentation's presence in unique ways. Floodwaters sometimes gathered fruit, leaves, and blossoms into shallow pools that warmed beneath the sun. As days passed, the mixtures within these calm waters shifted, creating areas where scents grew richer and more distinct. People gathering water or collecting plants occasionally discovered these lightly fermented pools, prompting slow recognition of the transformation occurring within them. The river's gentle currents carried these mixtures to new areas, providing repeated opportunities for observation. Within shelters, new forms of interaction emerged between humans and the materials they shaped. Clay vessels grew sturdier and more reliable. Some were used for cooking, others for storing grains or holding water. As these vessels became more common, the frequency of fermentation increased. Natural yeasts clung to their surfaces, settling into small pores formed during firing. When liquids or crushed fruits filled these vessels, fermentation began more easily. Over time, communities came to understand that certain jars produced more consistent results. These vessels became quietly prized, not through ceremony, but through repeated experience. As understanding grew, intentional collection of fermenting mixtures began. Early brewers, though not recognized as such at the time, experimented by gathering fallen fruit or mixing crushed berries with water. Containers were placed near warm areas or set aside in shaded spots, testing different conditions. Each new batch carried slight variations. Flavors deepened or softened. Scents grew sharper or gentler. Mixtures thickened or became more liquid. These changes occurred quietly, allowing knowledge to accumulate gradually across generations. Families gathered around firelight in the evenings, passing shared vessels among themselves. The fermented liquid within these containers carried warmth and subtle sweetness, easing the strain of long days. Conversations grew slower, movements gentler, and the atmosphere around the fire softened. These gatherings, though simple, marked the beginning of shared drinking as a communal act. The warmth of fermented drink became associated with rest, reflection, and the soft closeness of nightly routine. As seasons turned once more, the presence of fermented drink became woven into the rhythms of community life. It offered comfort during cold months, variation during periods of limited food, and gentle ease after days of labor. The transformation that began as a quiet natural occurrence slowly became a familiar companion, shaping moments of connection, ceremony, and rest. And though the origins remained hidden within the mysteries of the natural world, the people who lived through these early changes came to recognize fermentation as a subtle, dependable presence. One shaped not by sudden revelation, but by the steady unfolding of time. As years passed and communities settled deeper into familiar landscapes, the role of fermented mixtures gained a more consistent presence, though still without formal recognition or explanation. Camps expanded slightly as families grew, forming loose clusters of shelters arranged around shared fire pits. These simple homes, made from branches, grasses, hides, or early clay structures, absorbed the sense of daily life. Smoke, cooked grains, drying meat, and ripening plant matter. Vessels resting inside these spaces often held remnants of previous meals, bits of fruit, or water, carrying traces of natural yeast. Through these routine interactions, fermentation continued its quiet work, shaping the environment as gently as shifting wind or falling leaves. During warmer seasons, the scent of fermenting fruit drifted across forest clearings more frequently. Clusters of berries and wild apples fell in great numbers during late summer, their softened skins creating a blanket of sweetness beneath trees. Heat pushed fermentation forward rapidly, producing scents that spread over long distances. Animals gathered around these areas, attracted to the concentrated aroma. Some moved slowly after consuming the softened fruit, offering early humans subtle cues about the effects fermentation could produce. These scenes became seasonal markers, appearing reliably each year and reinforcing the quiet lesson that nature itself held processes beyond immediate comprehension. Grain gathering became a more structured activity as communities began storing food with increasing regularity. Grasses bearing nutritious seeds were harvested, dried, and set aside in pits or containers to last through colder months. However, the very act of storage introduced new opportunities for transformation. Moisture trapped within pits after unexpected storms caused grains to clump together. Warmth radiating through the earth encouraged change. People retrieving stored grain sometimes found softened clusters that carried a different scent and feel, marking the early stages of fermentation. Though these discoveries were not always welcome, they deepened awareness of the conditions under which grain shifted from one state to another. Occasionally, fermented mixtures became integrated into small ceremonies or gatherings, not through deliberate ritual, but because they provided comfort during transitional moments. At the end of long hunts, when groups returned home after days of travel, warm fires were lit beneath darkening skies. Vessels holding stored liquid were brought forward, their contents offering both hydration and a gentle, familiar warmth. During seasonal harvests, when fields or wild patches yielded abundant grain, fruit, or honey, the presence of fermented drink marked a subtle moment of celebration. These occasions unfolded without formal structure, yet they demonstrated how fermentation became tied to communal memory and shared experience. In riverine regions, the effects of fermentation appeared in floating vegetation mats and piles of fruit, carried downstream by shifting currents. After storms, branches and plant debris created temporary dams in shallow areas where water flowed more slowly. Within these natural basins, mixtures of crushed berries, blossoms, and seeds rested beneath sunlight. Over time, the warm water encouraged transformation. People collecting reeds or fish near these areas noticed the distinct scent rising from the mixture, a scent that differed from the fresh vegetation surrounding it. While these observations did not immediately lead to purposeful brewing, they represented another instance of fermentation revealing itself within everyday landscapes. Clay vessels continued to evolve, shaped by hands that experimented with form and size. Some jars had wide openings useful for preparing food. Others had narrower necks that slowed evaporation and protected contents from insects. The surfaces of these vessels retained traces of previous mixtures, and with repeated use, they became small repositories of yeast. Fermentation occurred more reliably inside them, even when conditions varied. Over time, families learned subtle lessons about which containers supported certain mixtures best. Without formal measurement or structured experimentation, early communities discovered that clay, warmth, and fruit created a harmonious combination. As generations passed, the subtle attraction to fermented mixtures grew stronger. Some communities developed favored spots near groves where fruit ripened abundantly. Others stored grains in shaded hollows within rock formations, where moisture levels remained more consistent. Honey harvested from wild hives became a treasured resource, and occasional mixtures formed unintentionally when honey rested in partially opened containers. These transformations were quiet, revealing themselves only when people returned to taste or inspect stored food. Yet the memory of such discoveries persisted, shaping habits and preferences over long spans of time. At night, when the world grew still and firelight flickered against shelter walls, the atmosphere around early homes softened. Shadows danced gently across the ground as groups sat together, resting after days of gathering or hunting. The faint sweetness of fermented drink mingled with smoke and the earthy scent of cooling embers. Conversations moved slowly, meandering through stories remembered from earlier seasons. These gatherings offered comfort in a world governed by uncertainty and natural cycles. Though the concept of brewing did not yet exist, the presence of fermented liquid provided a sense of warmth and calm that supported community bonds. Over time, the connection between fermentation and social gatherings became more pronounced. Even without formal understanding, early humans recognized that certain mixtures offered a consistent sense of relaxation. Seasonal events, harvests, migrations, returns from extended hunts, often coincided with the availability of fermenting fruit or grain. This alignment gave fermentation a quiet, almost symbolic place in communal life. It appeared naturally during moments of transition, reinforcing its role as a companion to both labor and rest. Patterns of experimentation emerged, though slow and unstructured. Some families crushed fruit deliberately before storing it, noticing that the resulting liquid changed more easily. Others mixed grains with water to soften them before cooking, inadvertently encouraging fermentation when the mixture rested too long. Honey diluted in warm water created small batches of mead-like liquid when stored in clay jars. Each technique arose independently, shaped by environment, availability, and memory. These early experiments formed the roots of brewing traditions, yet they unfolded with such ease and natural rhythm that no sudden distinction separated ordinary food preparation from intentional fermentation. As early humans settled more frequently in semi-permanent camps, the predictability of fermented mixtures increased. Shelters built from timber and clay protected stored foods from wind and rain, creating stable environments where fermentation occurred more evenly. Fire pits maintained consistent warmth, supporting mixtures left nearby. Storage areas grew larger, containing multiple vessels that aged in quiet darkness. These spaces, though simple, represented some of the earliest environments where fermentation became a stable process rather than occasional chance. Throughout these developments, fermentation remained intertwined with the cycles of nature. It was shaped by sunlight, moisture, temperature, and time. It existed wherever fruit ripened, grains softened, or honey pooled. It did not require tools or specialized knowledge to appear. Instead, it mirrored the slow, patient unfolding of daily life in the ancient world. For the people who lived through these changes, fermentation became part of the background rhythm, a gentle transformation that accompanied their work, rest, and gatherings. In these earliest centuries, alcohol did not carry ceremony, identity, or structured meaning. It existed simply as a natural process that humans grew gradually familiar with. Yet the comfort it offered became part of communal life, influencing social patterns, shaping small rituals, and soothing the quiet strain of survival. The deep, slow roots of fermentation settled into human culture long before anyone shaped the first dedicated brewery. It emerged as the result of time itself, carried forward by memory, environment, and the unhurried evolution of human understanding. As these early encounters with fermentation settled into the daily fabric of ancient communities, the quiet transformation that once appeared by chance began to take on a more deliberate presence. Generation after generation observed the soft changes that unfolded inside clay vessels, woven baskets, shaded pits, and forgotten pools of crushed fruit. What had once been an occasional curiosity grew into a subtle form of knowledge, passed gently through memories and repeated experience. Within this slow accumulation of understanding, certain individuals began to devote more attention to these mixtures. Those who noticed small details in scent, warmth, and texture. Those who lingered near vessels as they shifted from one state to another. In many encampments, there emerged a few figures who, through patience and quiet observation, developed a deeper familiarity with the rhythms of fermentation. Their hands understood the weight of ripened fruit, the softness of grains that had absorbed moisture, and the subtle warmth needed for transformation to begin. These individuals did not set out to create a craft. Instead, they followed the natural patterns that surrounded them, learning from the slow, steady processes that shaped early life. From this gradual emergence, one figure in particular stands at the center of the story to follow. Not a historical individual bound by name or record, but a symbolic representative of the countless early brewers whose work unfolded at the threshold of human memory. Through this figure, the narrative drifts into a more focused and gentle exploration of brewing's earliest practitioners, the quiet lives they lived, and the calm influence their discoveries carried across the ancient world. And so, as the larger rhythms of early human life continue in the background, the smoke rising from evening fires, the soft fermenting scents within shaded vessels, the perspective shifts toward a single life shaped by curiosity, patience, and the quiet unfolding of one of humanity's earliest transformations. The life of the early brewer began in a settlement that rested near the bend of a slow-moving river, where reeds swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, and soft layers of silt accumulated along the banks after seasonal floods. The settlement was modest in size, a circle of shelters formed from branches and packed earth, arranged in a pattern that loosely followed the contours of the surrounding land. Smoke rose in thin lines from several hearths, drifting upward and merging with the pale sky. Around the edges of the settlement, woven baskets and clay jars rested beneath simple overhangs, their surfaces warmed by the sun during the day and cooled by night air. The brewer's earliest memories were shaped by the sounds and scents of this landscape. Mornings carried the distant hum of insects awakening with the light. The air held a faint chill before the sun rose fully, pressing warmth into the earth. Leaves rustled softly as small animals moved through the underbrush, searching for seeds and berries. The brewer grew within these rhythms, watching elders gather fruit from nearby groves and transport it back to camp in bundles made from braided grasses. The fragrances that accompanied these gatherings, sweet, tart, and sometimes deeply ripened, became woven into daily experience. As seasons changed, the young brewer observed subtle patterns in the environment. Warm periods followed heavy rainfall, creating pockets of moisture where fruit softened quickly. Grain stored in clay-lined pits shifted during damp nights, becoming heavier and slightly swollen. Honey harvested from wild hives deepened in scent when left in containers for long stretches of time. None of these changes were fully understood, yet they presented gentle mysteries that encouraged quiet curiosity. In early adolescence, the brewer began assisting with food preparation. Tasks included crushing berries with rounded stones, cleaning clay jars still warm from the fire, and stirring mixtures of grain and water intended for cooking. During these activities, the brewer noticed small irregularities, tiny bubbles forming at the surface of certain mixtures, shifts in aroma after a vessel rested overnight, or faint warmth generated inside containers placed near the hearth. These details stirred a sense of wonder, though the changes seemed part of the natural flow of daily life. The brewer's family maintained a small cluster of jars near the dwelling's entrance, where light filtered through gaps in the wall and warmed the containers during the day. Occasionally, fruit pulp left inside these jars after a meal changed in subtle ways. A thin layer of foam might appear along the surface, or a softened scent might drift into the surrounding air. The brewer learned to recognize these signs long before understanding their cause, treating them not as anomalies, but as familiar aspects of the environment. With time, the brewer's attention settled increasingly upon these quiet transformations. While others focused on hunting, gathering, or crafting tools, the brewer lingered near storage areas, observing the gradual shifts that unfolded within the vessels. The changing colors, the softened textures, and the evolving scents created a sense of connection to an unseen process that operated beyond immediate perception. The brewer did not seek to control this process, only to understand its rhythms. During early adulthood, the brewer formed a habit of setting aside small quantities of leftover fruit or grain in separate jars. These containers were placed in locations that varied, some near the fire's warmth, others in shaded spots, and still others buried partially in the earth where temperatures remained cool and consistent. Days passed without interference, allowing each mixture to follow its own path. When the jars were eventually opened, the brewer observed differences that revealed themselves through scent, flavor, and texture. Some mixtures remained unchanged. Others shifted dramatically, their surfaces bubbling gently, or releasing aromas that had become deeper and more complex. Through these observations, the brewer gained a sense of the conditions that encouraged transformation. Warmth played a central role, though excessive heat caused mixtures to sour prematurely. Shade preserved freshness, but slowed the process. Containers with wide openings allowed aromas to escape, while narrow-necked vessels trapped them, intensifying the change within. Each discovery accumulated slowly, adding to a growing body of quiet knowledge that shaped the brewer's developing craft. The broader community noticed these interests and, over time, began relying upon the brewer for guidance during certain seasonal tasks. When fruit ripened in large quantities and needed to be preserved, the brewer suggested storage methods based on past experience. When grains gathered after harvest showed signs of early fermentation, The brewer offered insight drawn from years of observation. These contributions were subtle, not marked by authority or ceremony, but recognized in the everyday rhythms of life. During gatherings at dusk, the brewer often brought forth vessels containing mixtures that had rested for several days. The liquid within these containers carried a gentle warmth and sweetness, offering comfort during the cooling hours of the evening. Community members sipped these early brews slowly, experiencing a soft relaxation that eased the strain of long days. Over time, these gatherings became quietly associated with the brewer's presence, though no formal role or title marked this association. The brewer's days settled into a calm routine shaped by the cycles of nature. Mornings involved checking jars placed near the hearth, feeling the sides for warmth and listening for faint bubbling. Afternoons were spent gathering fruit or grain, crushing them with deliberate movements and preparing new mixtures to rest within the vessels. Evenings brought time for reflection, watching firelight flicker across the containers as scents deepened with each passing hour. As understanding grew, so too did the brewer's sense of connection to the unseen forces guiding fermentation. The process felt neither magical nor ordinary. It existed in a space between the tangible and intangible, shaped by the interplay of earth, air, warmth, and time. Each batch of fermented liquid carried the imprint of its surroundings: the soil where fruit had grown, the clay of the vessel, the ambient temperature of the shelter, and the subtle variations introduced by daily weather. The brewer learned to anticipate these influences, responding with adjustments that felt more intuitive than deliberate. Through the brewer's quiet dedication, fermentation became not merely a natural occurrence, but a gentle craft practiced with patience. Each vessel held a small world of transformation, unfolding at its own pace. Some batches remained mild and sweet. Others deepened into stronger brews. All reflected the slow dance between human care and the rhythms of nature. As years drifted steadily across the landscape, the brewer's reputation within the settlement deepened quietly, carried forward not through formal recognition, but through the steady reliability of a practiced hand. The vessels arranged near the brewer's dwelling grew in number, forming a small constellation of jars whose surfaces bore the marks of years spent near hearths, riverbanks, and shaded alcoves. Each container carried faint discolorations along its interior, subtle traces of fermentations past, and the brewer recognized these as markers of experience rather than impurities. Their history enriched each new batch, lending an invisible continuity that felt both comforting and familiar. Beyond the settlement's boundary, the land shifted gently between open fields and stands of trees that mottled the ground with patterns of shifting light. During certain seasons, grasses swayed in slow rhythmic waves beneath warm winds, releasing a dry, sun-baked scent that blended with the distant aroma of ripened fruit. The brewer often walked these areas in the early hours of the day, gathering ingredients not yet touched by heat. In quiet moments, the brewer paused to observe how fruit matured on branches, or how grain heads drooped under their own weight. These movements offered clues about timing, guiding the brewer's choices when preparing mixtures for fermentation. In the shaded spaces beneath dense canopies, the forest floor softened with layers of decaying leaves and fallen fruit. These natural pockets of warmth and moisture provided an ongoing lesson. The brewer often knelt beside them, noting the subtle simmer of insects drawn to the sweetness and the faint crackle of fermenting juices beneath the skin. By observing these spaces year after year, the brewer learned to predict when the environment itself would offer the strongest cues for creating new brews. The forest, river, and earth became sources of information as much as they were sources of ingredients. Occasionally, members of the settlement approached the brewer with offerings meant to inspire new mixtures. They brought fruit gathered from distant groves, honey collected from hidden hives, or wild grain harvested from meadows touched by floods. Each gift carried a story of the landscape's shifting moods, where storms had passed, where animals had grazed, where sunlight had lingered longest during certain seasons. The brewer received these offerings with calm appreciation, storing them in carefully chosen containers, or combining them with ingredients already set aside. These contributions represented a communal bond, a shared understanding that transformation required both patience and participation. In the river's shallows, smooth stones warmed rapidly under the midday sun. The brewer sometimes placed jars upon these stones to encourage fermentation, using the riverbank as a natural warming ground. Other times, jars were partially buried in cool sand along the shaded portions of the bank, allowing temperature to shift gradually as day moved to evening. These environmental interactions taught the brewer how slight fluctuations of warmth, shade, moisture, or time could alter the character of each brew. A single container might produce countless variations across the years, each one shaped by subtle differences in the world around it. Evenings brought a different rhythm to the settlement. As the sun dipped below the edge of the plain, its final rays cast long, soft shadows that stretched across the ground. The air cooled steadily, carrying the fragrance of herbs crushed beneath wandering footsteps and the distant smoke from other hearths. During these hours, the brewer often sat near the fire, examining the day's mixtures. The flickering light illuminated the vessel's curved surfaces, revealing small bubbles rising inside some jars and leaving others still and quiet. The brewer placed a hand gently upon each container, sensing temperature differences that indicated whether fermentation had begun. Members of the settlement gathered not far from the brewer's dwelling, forming circles around the communal fire. Children listened to stories spoken in low, rhythmic voices. Adults rested after long hours spent gathering, weaving, or hunting. The brewer's presence in these gatherings was quiet but integral. Occasionally, a vessel containing a recently finished brew was brought forth, and the liquid was poured carefully into small clay cups. The group shared this mild, warming drink as dusk settled. The taste varied from batch to batch, sometimes floral, sometimes earthy, sometimes sweet, depending on the season's yield. Each sip represented the gentle collaboration between human effort and natural process. Over the years, the brewer observed how fermentation influenced the moods and interactions within the settlement. No celebration required it, yet its presence softened the silence of cool nights and eased the strain of long, labor-filled days. Those gathered often spoke more slowly as the drink circulated. Movements grew more relaxed. Whispered reflections lingered longer in the air. The brewer recognized these effects not as magic, but as part of the larger rhythm that connected people to each other and to the environment. The gentle warmth of fermentation mirrored the warmth produced by shared company, creating a harmony that deepened communal bonds. The brewer's craft expanded further when new materials became available. Clay of different colors, found along distant reaches of the river, allowed for vessels that held temperature differently. Some jars retained heat longer, supporting fermentation in cooler seasons. Others remained cooler, preserving mixtures that needed more time before transformation. The brewer experimented with these vessels quietly, adding them slowly to the collection and noting the subtle ways in which their properties influenced outcomes. As age settled into the brewer's limbs, a calm steadiness took root. Movements became slower but more precise. Decisions about where to place jars or how to combine ingredients reflected years of observation. Younger members of the community began lingering nearby during daily tasks, watching the brewer's practiced motions. Their curiosity mirrored that of the brewer in earlier years. They asked gentle questions about scent, texture, or timing, and the brewer answered by demonstrating rather than explaining. Knowledge passed forward not through instruction, but through presence, through the quiet repetition of routine. In this gradual unfolding of time, the brewer's work formed a continuous thread, linking one season to the next. The jars that once seemed ordinary gained a quiet significance. The mixtures that once changed by chance now changed through intention, softened by intuition. The community's gatherings, once purely functional, became imbued with moments of peaceful reflection, supported by the drink created through fermentation's patient rhythm. With each passing year, the brewer's place within the settlement's memory grew more secure. While the world beyond the settlement remained vast and unknown, the simple craft of fermentation provided a constant source of comfort. It connected people to the landscape, to each other, and to the invisible processes that shaped the natural world. It marked the passage of time not through dramatic events, but through gentle changes in scent, warmth, and taste. It was in this enduring atmosphere of quiet discovery and communal warmth that the brewer's story settled deeply into the history of early human fermentation. A history shaped not by sudden breakthroughs, but by the slow, attentive observation of a world always transforming just beneath the surface. With time moving gently across the settlement, the brewer's days settled into a practiced rhythm shaped by the slow rise and fall of seasons. Each morning began with the faint glow of pale light filtering through the thin openings of the shelter. The air at dawn carried a slight coolness, and the dew resting on leaves outside reflected soft brightness. Before others stirred from their resting places, the brewer often stepped outside to observe the vessels arranged near the entrance. Some jars felt warm from the previous night's fire, while others retained the chill of the earth. These small differences guided the brewer's decisions, offering subtle clues about how each mixture was progressing. The brewer's shelter, though simple, reflected years of attentive work. The floor had been smoothed by repeated sweeping, and the walls carried faint discolorations from smoke and stored bundles of dried plants. Jars of various shapes lined one corner, their arrangement shifting as new batches were prepared, or older ones completed their transformation. The scent inside the shelter was a blend of clay, dried grain, and lingering traces of past fermentations, a scent that offered both familiarity and comfort. Midday brought warmth that seeped gradually into the land, loosening the chill left behind by night. During these hours, the brewer often traveled to nearby groves where fruit hung low on branches, weighed down by ripening flesh. Birds moved through the canopy with measured quietness, their wings beating softly as they searched for food. The brewer observed how some fruit showed faint signs of natural fermentation while still attached to branches. Their skins wrinkled slightly and their sweetness intensified. These small indicators informed the brewer's choices, guiding which fruits would be gathered and which would be left to continue their natural transformation. Along the edge of the river, the flow of water remained steady, carrying reflections of shifting clouds across its surface. Calm pools formed in bends where the current slowed, creating natural basins that trapped fallen leaves and softened fruits. The brewer knelt beside these pools often, watching small bubbles rise gently to the surface as warm afternoons encouraged fermentation. These pools served as reminders that the process unfolding within the vessels back home belonged to a larger pattern, already shaped by earth and water. It was this connection between deliberate craft and natural process that gave the brewer's work its quiet harmony. As the brewer aged, movements grew slower but carried a careful precision. The hands that lifted jars or stirred mixtures did so with a steadiness born from decades of observation. Younger members of the settlement sometimes accompanied the brewer on daily routines, their eyes tracing the motions that had become second nature to the elder brewer. They learned by watching how a grain mixture was shaken lightly to test its thickness, how a fruit mash was stirred to release trapped air, or how a vessel's surface was touched to sense the temperature inside. These small gestures revealed a lifetime of knowledge without need for spoken instruction. In late afternoons, long rays of sunlight filtered through the settlement, touching the vessels with a warm glow. The brewer often lifted each jar into this light in turn, examining colors that deepened as fermentation progressed. Some liquids took on hues reminiscent of amber or autumn leaves. Others remained pale, suggesting milder transformations. The brewer's gaze lingered over these colors, noting how they reflected the season's offerings. Whether the harvest had been plentiful, whether rains had come early, whether sunlight had reached the fruit long enough to sweeten it fully. Evenings brought a familiar softness that settled gradually across the land. Firelight flickered through the settlement, illuminating faces gathered in small circles. The brewer often sat near one of these fires, vessels resting nearby as the last warmth of the day faded. The gentle bubbling inside certain jars grew more noticeable in the quiet of night, offering faint rhythmic sounds that blended with the crackling of burning wood. These sounds, barely audible, became a kind of music marking the passage of time. The brewer's craft also held a reflective quality. When a mixture failed to transform, turning sour or remaining unchanged, the brewer took note of the conditions that had shaped it. Perhaps the nights had grown too cold. Perhaps the fire had warmed the nearby ground too quickly. Perhaps a jar had been set beside berries that ripened unevenly. These observations were made without frustration. Each outcome, successful or otherwise, contributed to the growing tapestry of knowledge woven through years of attentive practice. Weather sometimes altered the pace of fermentation dramatically. During periods of heavy rain, the air inside shelters thickened with moisture, slowing the transformation of grain-based mixtures. During dry seasons, fruit pulps thickened faster, encouraging deeper changes in shorter times. The brewer monitored these adjustments calmly, making small changes to the placement of jars or the timing of preparations. This responsiveness illustrated the brewer's deep understanding of how nature and craft shaped each other. Occasionally, the settlement received visitors from distant regions. These travelers carried stories of landscapes marked by different climates and rhythms. Some described areas where fruits ripened earlier in the year, their sweetness intensified by longer seasons of heat. Others spoke of colder lands where grains stored underground survived harsh winters, producing brews unlike any tasted before. The brewer listened to these accounts with quiet attentiveness, incorporating their insights into the broader understanding of fermentation's reach. These exchanges hinted at the vast variety of techniques emerging across different communities, each shaped by the land it inhabited. As the brewer reached the later stages of life, the settlement around them changed in gentle increments. Children grew into adults, shelters were rebuilt or expanded, and the land itself shifted as trees fell, new ones sprouted, and riverbanks eroded or gathered silt. Through all these transformations, the brewer's work remained a constant thread. The vessels continued to rest in familiar formations. The mixtures inside them continued to change with patient regularity, and the community continued to gather in quiet circles where shared drink fostered comfort and reflection. In the brewer's final years, a deeper stillness accompanied daily tasks. Steps became slower, but awareness remained keen. The brewer's presence near the vessels carried a sense of continuity, as if each jar and mixture held memories of countless seasons that had come before. The younger members of the settlement took on more responsibility, but still looked to the brewer for subtle guidance. An approving nod, a slight adjustment of a vessel's position, or a faint smile as a mixture reached its perfect state. The story of the brewer's life became woven into the settlement's collective memory, not as a tale of innovation or dramatic achievement, but as a reflection of the gentle perseverance that defined early human existence. Through quiet observation, patient experimentation, and reverence for natural rhythms, the brewer shaped a craft that would echo across thousands of years. And as twilight settled over the land, the soft scent of fermenting fruit and grain continued to rise from the vessels, honoring the legacy of the one who had devoted a lifetime to understanding their transformation. As the brewer's final seasons unfolded, the settlement moved through its familiar cycles with the same quiet steadiness that had shaped life for generations. The jars arranged near the dwelling continued their slow transformations, their contents darkening or lightening in gentle response to the shifting air. The brewer's hands, though marked by age, still rested with instinctive confidence upon each vessel, tracing the faint warmth or coolness that signaled the mixture's state. Knowledge once discovered through curiosity had matured into a lifetime of understanding, etched softly into movements that required no thought. The younger members of the settlement watched these final years with a calm reverence. They recognized that the brewer's presence embodied a thread stretching across countless seasons, one tied not to authority or ceremony, but to a thoughtful attention to the world's smallest shifts. When the brewer sat before the fire at dusk, vessels warming nearby, The community saw not just a single life, but the quiet continuation of something older than memory itself. The transformations inside the jars mirrored the transformations within the settlement, slow, subtle, and carried forward by those who paid close attention. When the brewers' days eventually reached their natural end, there was no sudden rupture in the rhythm of the settlement. Instead, life continued in the gentle manner it always had. The vessels remained where they had been placed. The fermentations continued their patient bubbling. The younger brewers, those who had learned through observation and quiet imitation, stepped into their roles without ceremony, guided not by instruction, but by the lingering presence of the elders' practiced movements. In this way, the brewers' influence endured, woven into the landscape, the community, and the ancient, unbroken process of fermentation itself. The story of the early brewer became part of the community's inner memory, a presence felt in the scent of ripened fruit, the warmth of jars near the fire, and the soft gathering of people at dusk. It lingered not in spoken recollection, but in the steady continuation of the craft, a craft shaped by time, care, and the patient attentiveness that defined early lives. Nothing ended abruptly. Everything simply shifted into a new phase, carried gently into the future by quiet hands and familiar routines. With the brewer's life now resting within the calm current of memory, the narrative drifts from the quiet routine of a single figure to the wider, deeper traces left behind by early fermentation. What began as observation and intuition eventually formed patterns that spread far beyond one settlement or one lifetime, across distant valleys and shelters, across fire-lit gatherings and shaded storage pits. These early experiments left subtle marks that would one day be uncovered by careful hands moving through layers of earth. As generations passed and landscapes changed, the vessels once held by the brewers' community slowly returned to the soil. Fragments of clay settled into sediment. Grains hardened into quiet remnants. Layers of earth enveloped the signs of ancient mixtures, preserving small pockets of residue that would lie untouched for thousands of years. And far beyond the settlement where the brewer once worked, other communities engaged in similar practices, each shaped by its own environment, yet connected through the natural process they shared. From these traces, the story shifts gently into a world of discovery long after the original brewers were gone. A world where archaeologists, moving with deliberate care, uncovered the quiet evidence of humanity's earliest encounters with fermentation. Their findings revealed echoes of those first transformations, residues along pottery walls, faint chemical signatures of honey and fruit, and stone-lined pits whose purpose still whispered through time. In this slow turning of perspective, the narrative moves toward the mysteries, the material remnants, and the unspoken questions that surround the ancient origins of alcohol, beginning the calm exploration that shapes the next chapter. Long after the first brewers lived their quiet lives, and long after their vessels returned to the soil, the landscapes they once inhabited changed in steady, unhurried ways. Sediment layered itself across riverbanks. Winds carried fine grains of sand across open plains. Vegetation grew and withered in endless cycles, covering traces of ancient settlements beneath soil, roots, and time. For thousands of years, everything that had been familiar to the earliest brewers rested in silence beneath the earth, held in patience by layers of sediment that folded gently over one another, like the turning pages of a vast, unwritten history. It was within these layers that the earliest archaeological traces of fermentation were eventually found. They did not reveal themselves abruptly. Instead, they appeared slowly, discovered through years of careful study, excavation, and quiet observation. Archaeologists working across diverse regions uncovered faint chemical signatures on pottery shards, subtle discolorations along the insides of jars, and microscopic residues left behind by grains, honey, and fruit long since forgotten. These remnants, though fragile, provided the first tangible clues that fermentation had taken root in human life far earlier than once imagined. In certain caves, sheltered from wind and rain, ancient containers were preserved more completely. Their sides bore marks of repeated use, thin layers of residue that had hardened over time, now visible only under close examination. When these vessels were carefully lifted from their resting places, the surrounding air carried a cool stillness that had settled within the cave walls for millennia. The texture of the pottery revealed the hands that shaped it, and the faint traces of organic material suggested mixtures left to rest in darkness, transforming quietly as the seasons changed outside. Some of the earliest evidence came from fragments discovered in a cave where storage pits lined the ground. Analysis revealed a mixture of honey, wild berries, tree resins, and fermented grain, a combination that suggested experimentation not unlike the simple methods practiced by the early brewer. Though thousands of years separated the excavation from the original craft, the residue carried an echo of warmth, sweetness, and transformation that once shaped the lives of those who prepared it. The pottery fragments, though small, offered a glimpse into a world where fermentation had already become a gentle, intentional part of daily life. Across distant regions, stone-lined pits revealed additional mysteries. Some pits were filled with cracked grain, their surfaces burned lightly by heated stones used in ancient cooking or brewing. Others contained remnants of plant matter soaked in water long ago. These subtle indicators hinted at early brewing methods that may have involved heating, soaking, and waiting. Techniques carried out without written knowledge, but guided by observation and inherited memory. The stone walls of these pits held the warmth of countless fires that once burned above them, and their interiors carried the faint marks of mixtures stirred or pressed against their surfaces. In one such site, located along the edge of a prehistoric river settlement, archaeologists discovered a series of jars arranged in a shallow arc, each containing traces of fermented residue. The jars varied in size, suggesting that some were used for preparation, others for storage, and still others for serving. The positioning of the vessels indicated a deliberate space for brewing, a place where warmth, shade, and airflow could be controlled with surprising precision. Though the techniques used in this ancient workshop were simple, they reflected a deep understanding of the environmental conditions that shaped fermentation. Another cluster of discoveries emerged from valley settlements, where grains had been cultivated for generations. In these areas, archaeologists unearthed pottery coated with thin films of starch residue, altered by alcohol-producing yeast. Under magnification, these residues revealed patterns that matched the earliest stages of fermentation, tiny bubbles trapped within hardened layers, faint chemical changes now frozen in time. Such findings spoke to a world where people recognized the potential of stored grain and experimented with its transformation, guided by the slow, steady rhythms of their environment. In burial sites, ancient pottery was sometimes found, placed beside individuals who had been laid to rest with care. Some vessels contained residues of fermented liquid, suggesting that alcohol held symbolic meaning in early conceptions of life, death, and passage. These offerings, still faintly scented by the soil surrounding them, indicated that fermentation had become more than sustenance or comfort. It had entered the realm of ritual, offering a symbolic bridge between the living and whatever lay beyond. Though the specific beliefs surrounding these burials remained unknown, the presence of fermented drink hinted at a universally human desire to carry familiar comforts into the unknown. Beyond pottery and pits, archaeologists uncovered tools associated with early brewing: stones used for grinding grain, carved wooden stirrers darkened by repeated use, and fragments of woven mats that once strained fruit or filtered liquid. These objects, though humble, carried the imprint of hands that worked with patient attentiveness. Each item suggested a deliberate process, shaped by experience and memory, refined over many seasons. The arrangement of these tools within ancient settlements revealed spaces dedicated to preparation, storage, and gathering, painting a picture of communities where fermentation had become an integrated part of daily life. Chemical analysis added further layers to the story. Researchers identified traces of tartaric acid on pottery from regions where grapes grew wild, indicating the presence of early wine. Elsewhere, remnants of mead were discovered in vessels older than the earliest known agricultural societies, suggesting that honey-based fermentation may have preceded organized farming. The chemical fingerprints of rice beer appeared in settlements along river deltas, aged thousands of years beneath the soil. Each discovery expanded the timeline of fermentation, pushing its origins deeper into prehistory. Alongside these findings, archaeologists uncovered symbolic carvings and markings etched into pottery, simple lines, swirling patterns, and shapes that may have denoted ownership, ingredients, or ritual significance. Though their meanings remained elusive, they implied a cultural framework forming around fermented drink, one shaped not by written records, but by shared understanding, communicated through patterns and repetition. Many mysteries remained unsolved. Some residues revealed combinations of ingredients that had not been documented in surviving traditions, hinting at lost recipes and forgotten rituals. Certain pits appeared too large for household brewing, but too small for large gatherings, suggesting functions still unknown. And in quiet corners of excavation sites, researchers found vessels whose residues contained unexpected mixtures: plants without known brewing properties, grains used only rarely, fruits that grew far from the settlement. These puzzling findings suggested experimentation, trade, or symbolic preparations that extended beyond ordinary consumption. All of these clues, chemical, structural, symbolic, formed a mosaic of early fermentation practices woven across continents. From cool caves to warm riverbanks, from burial offerings to everyday storage vessels, the evidence painted a picture of a world where fermentation had become a gentle, pervasive presence shaped by patience, environment, and cultural memory. And yet, much of the story remained hidden beneath layers of earth still undisturbed, waiting for future hands to uncover new fragments of this ancient craft. Across vast regions separated by mountains, deserts, and forests, archaeologists found more threads of the same ancient story. In remote highland terraces, fragments of early ceramic vessels lay buried beneath centuries of wind-blown soil. Their interiors preserved faint traces of fermenting mixtures made from grains adapted to cooler climates. The texture of the residues suggested slow transformations, shaped by the temperature of the mountain air and the unique properties of local plants. In these elevated settlements, fermentation seemed to have been practiced with the same quiet patience found in riverine communities far below, indicating that the craft emerged independently wherever conditions allowed fruit, grain, or honey to rest undisturbed. In coastal settlements where winds carried the scent of salt water across sand and stone, archaeologists uncovered evidence of fermentation that utilized marine resources. Seaweed, shellfish residues, and brackish water mingled with plant-based ingredients in certain vessels. These mixtures suggested communities experimenting with what their environment offered, incorporating the ocean's rhythm into their brewing practices. The vessels themselves were shaped differently from inland pottery. Their forms widened to accommodate ingredients found near the shore. Despite such variations, the transformation inside the vessels carried the same subtle signs: chemical shifts, microscopic bubbles, and softened starch that marked fermentation elsewhere. Some of the most evocative discoveries came from burial mounds, where vessels were placed with great care. These jars, often sealed with clay or stone, contained residues protected from air and moisture for thousands of years. Inside them, archaeologists detected remnants of fruit blended with herbs and tree resins. These combinations suggested early forms of seasoned or flavored fermented drinks, crafted perhaps for ceremonial or symbolic purposes. The arrangement of these vessels within burial spaces indicated reverence, a sign that the drink held significance beyond ordinary sustenance. It represented comfort, continuity, or companionship for the journey into the afterlife. In certain ancient settlements, hearths used specifically for brewing were identifiable by the arrangement of stones and the presence of charred organic layers beneath them. These hearths formed small circular patches of darkened earth, their boundaries defined by years of repeated use. Potsherds scattered around the hearths revealed residues of heated mixtures, grains softened by warm water, fruit pulps lightly cooked before fermentation began, and herbs added for subtle flavoring. These findings suggested that brewing had become a deliberate, structured activity in some communities, carried out in spaces set aside for this purpose. Archaeologists also uncovered shallow basins carved into rock surfaces near ancient campsites. Some were no larger than a pair of hands held together. Others were wide enough to hold several liters of liquid. Rainwater often collected in these basins, and during warmer months, the combination of moisture, plant matter, and wild yeast created natural sites of fermentation. The discovery of these basins raised questions about whether early humans used them intentionally or simply observed the transformations occurring within them. In either case, the natural landscape itself played an active role in shaping early brewing traditions. Microscopic analysis of grindstones revealed plant residues embedded deep within their surfaces. These traces included grains that had undergone chemical alterations consistent with heating and fermentation. The grindstones told a story of repetitive, rhythmic movement, hands patiently grinding seeds or grains into coarse meal, forming part of a process that would eventually lead to fermentation. These remnants suggested that brewing developed alongside early culinary practices, emerging from the same daily motions that shaped ancient kitchens. Some excavation sites revealed storage areas where vessels were arranged in careful rows, protected from sunlight by overhanging rock or compacted earth. These storage spaces were cool and consistently shaded, offering ideal environments for fermentation to proceed at a measured pace. The arrangement of vessels in these areas suggested knowledge passed through generations, knowledge of temperature, airflow, and stability. Even without formal measurement or tools, early brewers understood the subtleties of their surroundings well enough to shape these spaces with quiet precision. In the heart of more complex settlements, archaeologists found large communal structures with floors stained by layers of organic material. These spaces, though their exact function remained uncertain, were likely used for gatherings, feasts, or ceremonies. The presence of pottery shards with fermented residues near these structures suggested communal consumption of early alcohol. In such places, fermentation became not only a household practice, but a collective one. The faint traces preserved beneath the floors hinted at gatherings marked by shared drink, slow conversation, and the soft merging of voices rising through fire-lit interiors. Elsewhere, in regions where wild bees thrived, archaeologists uncovered vessels containing residues of fermented honey mixed with tree sap. These remnants pointed to early forms of mead, perhaps one of the oldest intentional fermented beverages known. The presence of beeswax traces along the rim of certain vessels indicated attempts to seal them, preserving the contents for days or weeks. This practice suggested that some communities recognized the importance of controlling air exposure and protecting mixtures from insects. Their methods were simple, yet effective, reflecting an intuitive understanding of how to guide natural processes. Even more intriguing were the rare discoveries of carved wooden vessels, preserved in anaerobic conditions that prevented their decay. These wooden containers bore marks that indicated repeated stirring or shaking. Their smooth interiors held faint imprints of mixtures once swirled against their walls. Where chemical analysis was possible, tiny fragments of fermented grain or fruit were detected. The presence of wooden brewing vessels implied a level of craftsmanship and cultural investment that extended beyond simple necessity. Such vessels required time, skill, and intention to create. Not all archaeological clues were material. Some emerged from ancient iconography, painted scenes on pottery, carved figures, or etched symbols that appeared to depict gatherings involving shared drink. In some images, stylized jars rested at the center of social scenes. Other figures seemed to gesture toward communal bowls or vessels with elongated necks, their shapes reminiscent of brewing containers. These depictions, though symbolic, suggested recognition of fermented drink as part of social identity, connected to hospitality, ritual, or seasonal celebration. The archaeological landscape of early fermentation was rich but incomplete. Findings offered glimpses rather than full narratives. Fragments of pottery, pockets of residue, tools worn by repetitive motions, hearths blackened by ancient fires. Yet from these fragments, a gentle picture emerged. Fermentation had become part of human life, not through sudden invention, but through long, careful interaction with the natural world. It spread across regions independently, shaped by environment, culture, and the quiet attentiveness of communities who learned to guide it. And still, countless questions remained. Why had certain ingredients been chosen over others? How did early people perceive the subtle effects of fermented drink? At what point did fermentation shift from accidental discovery to intentional craft? These mysteries lingered in the spaces between artifacts, held gently by the earth, and waiting for future discoveries to bring them into clearer focus. In certain regions shaped by shifting climates, archaeological layers revealed abrupt changes in fermentation practices. Periods of drought left drier, dustier residues inside vessels, suggesting that water scarcity altered the types of brews communities could create. In years of abundant rainfall, vessels contained thicker, sweeter remnants, a sign that fruit harvests had flourished. These subtle patterns allowed researchers to trace how fermentation evolved alongside environmental fluctuations. The jars became quiet record keepers, holding within their hardened walls a timeline of changing seasons, weather cycles, and human adaptation. Some of the most striking evidence emerged from ancient refuse pits, deep, layered deposits of discarded pottery, broken tools, and organic remains. Within these layers, archaeologists discovered clusters of vessels discarded in groups, their interiors coated with similar residues. This suggested moments when entire batches of brew had been prepared or consumed together, perhaps during seasonal rituals or communal gatherings. Though the reasons remained unknown, the patterns hinted at early social traditions shaped around shared drink. The soft residues left behind formed a kind of archaeological chorus, speaking in whispers about gatherings now lost to time. Elsewhere, ancient kilns revealed traces of vessels deliberately designed for brewing. Their shapes were consistent, their walls evenly fired, and their interiors treated with clay slips that prevented leakage and controlled temperature. These vessels represented an early form of specialization, evidence that certain communities had developed dedicated brewing techniques. The existence of such kilns implied the presence of artisans who understood the connection between vessel quality and the success of fermentation. Their work carried the same patient rhythm as the brewer from earlier generations, but refined through repetition and subtle improvement. Further discoveries expanded the understanding of how fermentation intersected with ritual life. In some sacred sites, archaeologists uncovered vessels that had been intentionally broken during ceremonies, their shards scattered across specific patterns thought to hold symbolic meaning. The residues inside these vessels bore traces of herbal mixtures, suggesting that the drinks served here differed from everyday brews. These ceremonial remnants hinted at a belief system in which fermentation played a quiet, meaningful role, perhaps as an offering, perhaps as a bridge between the earthly and the spiritual. In cave complexes decorated with ancient artwork, faint traces of fermented residue appeared near painted walls. The presence of these residues suggested that fermented mixtures may have accompanied the creation of early symbolic art. Perhaps they were consumed during long, contemplative hours spent painting near flickering torchlight. Perhaps they were part of rituals conducted within the echoing chambers. No firm conclusions emerged, but the residues hinted at a quiet connection between creativity, ritual, and the soft warmth offered by early fermented drink. Chemical analysis continued to reveal surprises. In certain vessels, researchers detected compounds associated with medicinal plants, roots, bark extracts, and herbs known for calming or soothing properties. These combinations suggested that fermentation may have served not only as nourishment or ritual, but also as a form of healing. Fermented mixtures carrying gentle plant infusions may have offered comfort during times of illness or exhaustion, their effects subtle but valued. The vessels that held these mixtures became symbols of care, linking ancient brewers with early forms of medicine. Not all artifacts were well preserved. Many vessels were discovered as mere fragments, their edges worn by time. Yet even the smallest shard could carry microscopic traces of fermentation. Researchers examined these shards under magnification, uncovering starch grains swollen by heat or altered by microbial action. These tiny markers acted as quiet signatures of ancient activity, offering evidence even when the original vessel no longer existed in full. Through them, entire chapters of brewing history were reconstructed grain by grain, residue by residue. Across continents, from river valleys to mountain passes, from coastal settlements to desert oases, the archaeological story of fermentation unfolded in gentle, interconnected branches. The evidence painted a collective picture of humanity's early relationship with transformation, the transformation of fruit to liquid, grain to brew, and patience to understanding. Though separated by vast distances, ancient communities shared a common discovery that time, warmth, and natural forces could shape ingredients into something new. As researchers pieced together these scattered clues, a broader pattern emerged. Fermentation was not an isolated invention, but a natural phenomenon recognized and cultivated by many cultures independently. Each community developed its own method shaped by its surroundings. Some focused on fruit, others on honey or grain, but all embraced the same process with the same patient attentiveness. The archaeological record revealed brewing as a global practice long before written history, woven quietly into the earliest human societies. Yet even with all these findings, many mysteries remained. Countless residues still lay buried beneath untouched layers of earth. Countless vessels had crumbled beyond recognition. Countless traditions had vanished without leaving clear material traces. The story of early fermented drink remained incomplete, shaped as much by what was lost as by what survived. Archaeology offered glimpses through narrow openings, revealing small, luminous fragments of a much deeper past. Still, these fragments were enough to trace a gentle arc from the earliest brewers to the present. They showed how fermentation had remained a constant companion through time, a quiet craft shaped by patience, observation, and a deep connection to the natural world. The vessels resting beneath ancient soil, the residues preserved by chance, and the tools worn smooth by years of use collectively carried the memory of brewing's earliest steps. As the last light of Segment 3 settles, the narrative prepares to drift from archaeological Earth back to the living structures of early societies, from shards and residues to the contrasting lives of those who shaped the world around brewed drink. The story turns now toward the places where elites, leaders, and ritual specialists carried fermentation into their own spheres of influence, creating spaces where the craft took on new meaning and new forms. As the quiet evidence buried in the earth offers its final reflections, the narrative rises gently from excavation sites and ancient shards, turning toward the broader societies that surrounded these early practices. The traces found in soil and pottery reveal much about ordinary life, yet they also hint at the presence of larger structures, places where power collected, where rituals were shaped, and where fermented drink held roles extending beyond daily sustenance. From these scattered clues, the perspective shifts upward and outward, drifting toward the chambers of early elites, the hearths of ritual leaders, and the calm interior spaces where fermentation intertwined with authority, celebration, and social identity. In this transition, the story moves from buried remnants to living worlds, tracing how the quiet craft of brewing shaped not only common households, but also the highest circles of ancient societies. As early societies grew in size and complexity, the quiet craft of fermentation gradually found its place within the upper tiers of social life. While ordinary communities relied upon simple brews for comfort, gathering, and gentle nourishment, the elites of ancient settlements adopted these same practices with a different intention. In their world, fermented drinks became not only sources of warmth and subtle ease, but also markers of status, ceremony, and controlled hospitality. Within the dwellings of leaders, priests, and those who directed the rhythms of early civilization, fermentation acquired layers of meaning shaped by ritual, hierarchy, and the symbolic weight of shared drink. The structures inhabited by these early elites differed from the shelters of ordinary people. They were built with more enduring materials, thicker walls formed from shaped stone, hardened clay, or wooden beams fitted with deliberate care. These dwellings often rose beside central plazas, elevated terraces, or sacred enclosures. Inside them, the light filtered through narrow openings or reed screens, casting soft patterns across the ground. Shadows lingered in the corners where storage vessels rested, and the air carried a faint mixture of incense, earth, and grain. Within these spaces, fermentation took on a quiet formality. Vessels used by the upper classes were crafted with attention to symmetry and smoothness, their surfaces often adorned with carved lines, geometric patterns, or polished finishes. These embellishments were not extravagant, but they reflected a desire to distinguish certain containers from the jars used for daily sustenance. Some vessels were designed with long, slender necks that preserved aromatic qualities. Others bore wide bases that steadied them on raised platforms or ceremonial tables. The care taken in shaping these containers mirrored the social importance attributed to the drinks they held. In many early societies, fermented beverages featured prominently in ceremonial gatherings. Leaders and ritual specialists convened in calm, enclosed chambers where vessels were arranged with deliberate spacing. The atmosphere inside such rooms was subdued, with light from smoking lamps illuminating the surfaces of the containers. During these gatherings, fermented drinks were poured into small cups carved from bone, shell, or fired clay. Each cup carried only a modest portion, emphasizing the controlled nature of consumption. The act of drinking became part of a larger pattern of ritual offerings, symbolic exchanges, and quiet affirmations of social bonds. Ritual specialists, often serving both spiritual and administrative roles, prepared certain brews with herbs or botanical additions considered sacred or protective. These mixtures, based on plant knowledge passed through generations, were not stronger or more potent than ordinary brews. Instead, they carried associations linked to seasons, celestial events, or ancestral memory. When Beelzebub consumed in ceremonial contexts, these drinks formed a bridge between tangible daily life and the intangible realms honored by early societies. The vessels reserved for such preparations often bore markings or symbols indicating their purpose. In settlements where grain agriculture flourished, fermentation became inseparable from the rhythms of harvest and storage. The elites who oversaw these processes maintained granaries where harvested crops were measured, counted, and distributed. Within the cool interiors of these granaries, fermentation transformed from a household craft into a controlled asset. Leaders understood that grain stores influenced stability. Thus, allocating grain for brewing required thoughtful consideration. Certain reserves were set aside each season, destined to become fermented drink used in rituals, feasts, or diplomatic exchanges with neighboring groups. The calm deliberation behind these decisions reflected the intertwining of agriculture, governance, and social cohesion. Feasts hosted by elites carried their own patterns, shaped by the architecture of the gathering spaces. Large communal halls with central fire pits served as settings for these events. During such gatherings, fermented beverages were not consumed in haste. They were passed steadily, cup by cup, with a rhythm that matched the slow cadence of conversation and ceremonial storytelling. Musicians played instruments crafted from reeds, stone, or stretched hide, their gentle tones filling the hall with a soft resonance. Elders recited narratives that connected past and present, lending weight to the occasion. The drink itself served as a quiet accompaniment rather than a focal point. Trade networks further enhanced the role of fermentation in elite life. Long-distance exchange brought ingredients and vessels from distant regions. Shells from coasts, resins from forests, copper cups from mountainous areas. These items entered the world of rituals and feasts, expanding the symbolic meaning of fermented beverages. When poured into vessels made from rare materials, the drink acquired associations linked to the journeys of traders, the landscapes of foreign settlements, and the quiet, expansive idea of connection between communities. In more stratified societies, the distribution of fermented drink followed social boundaries. Leaders, ritual practitioners, and honored guests were served first, receiving the drink in finely made vessels. Skilled artisans, respected elders, and visiting travelers followed. The order in which the drink was passed communicated subtle messages about hierarchy, responsibility, and communal trust. Yet even in these controlled contexts, the tone remained gentle. No sense of urgency accompanied the passing of the vessels. Instead, movements were steady and deliberate, creating an atmosphere shaped by patient attention. Some communities integrated fermentation into sacred architecture. In temple complexes or ritual enclosures, archaeologists later found specialized rooms where vessels were stored in precise arrangements. These spaces were often located near altars or within inner chambers, accessible only to certain individuals. The presence of fermented beverages in such spaces suggested their role as offerings to ancestors, spirits, or celestial forces. The calm rituals conducted in these chambers likely involved quiet chants, rhythmic drumming, or silent contemplation, accompanied by the gentle scent of fermenting grain or fruit. In societies with hereditary leadership, knowledge of fermentation was often preserved among select families or lineages. These groups maintained traditional methods, ensuring that the symbolic brews used in ceremonies remained consistent across generations. Their practices were steady and unhurried, reflecting a belief in the importance of continuity. Vessels passed down through lineages bore marks of repeated use, their surfaces smoothed by countless hands, their interiors darkened by layers of residue accumulated slowly over centuries. The contrast between elite brewing practices and those of ordinary people lay not in intensity, but in purpose. For common households, fermentation provided comfort after labor, nourishment during gatherings, and connection during long seasons. For elites, it provided structure, symbolism, and a means of guiding social harmony. Both worlds understood the gentle power of the drink, yet each shaped its meaning according to its place within society. As centuries passed, these elite practices left subtle imprints within archaeological remains. Larger vessels with decorative patterns, cups made from rare materials, and storage chambers built with intention all indicated the social significance of fermented beverages. These traces revealed a world where leaders and ritual specialists incorporated fermentation into the fabric of identity, governance, and ceremony, shaping traditions that traveled across generations with quiet perseverance. And as the narrative prepares to drift onward, the focus shifts from elite spaces to the broader landscape surrounding them, toward the slow connections between communities, the trade routes that carried ideas and ingredients, and the gentle expansion of fermentation across regions shaped by climate, terrain, and memory. As the last embers of elite gatherings fade softly into memory, the narrative widens once more, drifting beyond ceremonial halls, storage chambers, and carved vessels. The story now expands to encompass the broader world surrounding these societies, the quiet networks of trade, the steady flow of materials across wide landscapes, and the calm ways in which fermentation traveled from one community to another. Through these gentle movements, early human groups shared not only tools and ingredients, but also ideas, practices, and the slow wisdom carried by time. Beyond the walls of elite dwellings and the ceremonial spaces where refined vessels rested in deliberate arrangements, the wider landscape stretched out in calm expanses of grasslands, forests, mountains, and winding river valleys. It was across these expansive worlds that fermentation traveled gently, carried not by urgency, but by the natural drift of human movement. Seasonal migrations, quiet trade routes, distant kinship visits, and the simple exchange of memory all contributed to the soft expansion of this ancient craft. No single moment marked its spread. Instead, fermentation moved like a slow tide, rising across generations and settling into the lives of communities far removed from its earliest origins. The first pathways of exchange formed along rivers whose currents guided travelers from one settlement to another. Canoes carved from hollowed trunks drifted steadily across calm waters, carrying passengers who transported baskets of dried grain, bundles of fruit, and vessels sealed with resin. These travelers did not necessarily consider themselves bearers of a craft, yet the contents they carried held quiet potential. When arriving in distant communities, the stories they shared about a certain mixture left too long in a jar or a fruit mash that developed a pleasant warmth sparked gentle curiosity among those who listened. No instructions were exchanged, yet the idea took root, prompting experimentation shaped by local ingredients and conditions. Across forest trails worn smooth by the passage of feet, traders journeyed between settlements with goods gathered from far distances. Some carried salt from coastal regions. Others brought obsidian, shells, or woven cloth. Among these items, small vessels occasionally appeared. Vessels that contained remnants of fermented drink, sampled during meals shared beside the fire. The flavor of a new brew introduced in this way left an impression, leading households to attempt their own versions once the traders departed. The quiet act of sharing a drink became a catalyst for new practices, expanding the craft without deliberate intention. In mountain communities where the air thinned and the land grew stony, fermentation adapted to different ingredients. Grains suited to colder climates ripened slowly in terraced fields, and fruit grew along the edges of narrow valleys protected from wind. Travelers from lowland settlements sometimes reached these high places, carrying memories of brewing methods that had shaped their lives. The mountain communities listened to these stories, observing how fruit was crushed or grain was soaked. Over time, they developed their own approaches, shaped not by imitation, but by the rhythms of the land. Rhythms that dictated when warmth was available, when water flowed freely, and when ingredients reached maturity. In coastal regions, where the sound of waves shaped daily experience, fermentation took on new forms. Communities living along these shores relied on fish, shellfish, and wild plants for sustenance. When fruit or grain was scarce, they turned to seaweed, tubers, and other local resources. Some fermentation occurred unintentionally in containers exposed to the ocean air. Other times, deliberate mixtures were created using ingredients washed ashore by tides. The salt carried by the wind influenced these brews subtly, adding flavors and properties unique to coastal life. Through seasonal gatherings, moments when inland and coastal groups met to exchange resources, these variations in brewing knowledge drifted inland, inspiring further experimentation across distant settlements. Trade networks expanded gradually, following the contours of landscapes shaped by rivers, passes, and open plains. These routes connected communities that otherwise seldom interacted. Along the paths, traders rested at temporary camps where fires burned quietly through the night. During these moments of rest, travelers shared small portions of fermented drink carried from their homes. The act of sharing was simple and unremarkable, yet its influence spread far. Communities along the trade routes adopted new ingredients or techniques, adjusting them to suit the plants, waters, and season of their own environments. Beyond material trade, ideas traveled just as steadily. Stories of a community where certain fruits fermented quickly in clay-lined pits, or where grain brews developed unique flavors, circulated from one settlement to another. These stories moved like drifting seeds, taking root in places receptive to quiet innovation. No urgency accompanied these exchanges. Change occurred slowly, shaped by observation and opportunity. Each community contributed something distinct to the evolving mosaic of brewing practices, creating variations that reflected their landscapes, cultures, and histories. Across generations, fermentation became embedded in the traditions of communities separated by vast distances. In some regions, it formed the centerpiece of seasonal gatherings. In others, it accompanied rites of passage, festivals, or quiet nights spent beside the fire. Even in places where ingredients were scarce, people found ways to create simple mixtures that sustained the gentle warmth of fermented drink. These variations highlighted the adaptability of the craft, capable of thriving wherever people observed, experimented, and responded to the subtle cues of their surroundings. Over time, certain ingredients gained significance through repeated use. Grains cultivated across fertile plains became foundational for many brews. Fruits harvested from forest edges offered sweetness and depth. Honey collected from wild hives provided a medium rich in potential for fermentation, used in mixtures created for both nourishment and ceremony. As communities interacted through trade, migration, or seasonal gatherings, these ingredients traveled with them. Their movement helped shape the global story of fermentation long before written histories emerged. Wherever fermentation spread, it carried a sense of continuity. Communities who adopted the craft often integrated it into their own identities, shaping the practice through local customs and beliefs. In some places, fermented drink became associated with hospitality, offered to guests as a sign of welcome. In others, it formed part of collective memory, tied to ancestral stories or seasonal rituals. Across these diverse contexts, the underlying process remained the same: raw ingredients transformed through time and natural forces, guided by patient hands and quiet attention. As centuries unfolded, fermentation's expansion became one of the subtle threads connecting early human societies. It forged ties across distances, bridged cultural differences, and created shared experiences rooted in the natural world. Its spread was not dramatic, but steady, shaped by the gentle flow of rivers, the soft tread of travelers, and the quiet movements of people who carried memory from one generation to the next. As trade routes matured and communities deepened their ties, fermentation began to take on a role that extended beyond nourishment, ritual, or quiet comfort. In some places, it became part of the economic rhythm that shaped entire regions. Certain settlements grew known for the strength, sweetness, or clarity of their brews. Travelers recognized these distinctions not through deliberate branding or widespread reputation, but through steady generational memory. A brew associated with a certain valley might carry the fragrance of its wildflowers. Another from a distant river plain might bear the subtle influence of its cooling winds. These differences became woven into cultural identity, forming patterns that endured long after specific communities faded from the landscape. The material used to support fermentation also traveled across the expanding networks. Clay with particular mineral compositions, prized for its ability to retain heat or resist cracking, moved from region to region. Some communities specialized in crafting jars with narrow necks to preserve aroma, while others shaped wide-mouthed vessels ideal for fruit fermentations. These objects traveled in the packs of traders, in the hands of visiting families, and sometimes even as ceremonial gifts exchanged between leaders. Their movement allowed brewing traditions to take new shapes across unfamiliar environments, Where rivers converged or trade paths intersected, large seasonal gatherings emerged. Temporary settlements where hundreds of people from distant regions assembled for exchange, storytelling, feasting, and celebration. During these gatherings, the sharing of fermented drink held quiet significance. Vessels filled with mixtures from different regions were offered to guests, who tasted the unique qualities shaped by lands they might never visit. In these moments of gentle hospitality, new ideas were exchanged. A method of warming jars near embers, a technique for crushing fruit more effectively, a practice of adding herbs to shape flavor or meaning. These gatherings formed natural crossroads where fermentation evolved not through deliberate planning, but through subtle observation and open curiosity. In some landscapes, the craft adapted not only to ingredients, but also to climate. In warmer regions, fermentation proceeded quickly, encouraging shorter cycles and lighter brews. In cooler locations, the process unfolded more slowly, producing deeper flavors shaped by patient waiting. These differences influenced the rituals that surrounded consumption. In warm climates, fermented drinks often accompanied early evenings when heat softened and the air cooled. In colder climates, drinks were shared around central hearths, where fire offered comfort during long nights. The environment shaped not only flavor, but atmosphere, reinforcing the idea that fermentation harmonized with the land rather than standing apart from it. As millennia continued their slow turning, the craft's expansion followed the paths of human migration. Groups moving into new regions carried memories of brewing techniques learned from their ancestors. When they encountered unfamiliar plants or landscapes, they adapted their methods, discovering new ingredients that transformed into fermented mixtures in ways both expected and unforeseen. These adaptations created endless variations, each one reflecting the environment that nurtured it. Even in places where early attempts failed due to climate or resource limitations, the desire to recreate familiar brews persisted, occasionally yielding surprising breakthroughs as communities learned to coax transformation from unfamiliar ingredients. Through these long cycles of movement and adaptation, fermentation became an enduring thread woven through the fabric of early human life. Though its form shifted, its essence remained constant, the quiet transformation of simple ingredients through the patient cooperation of nature and human care. It brought comfort after difficult seasons, strengthened bonds during gatherings, and provided subtle warmth during cold nights. It marked transitions, supported rituals, and helped shape the stories communities told about themselves. The movement of fermentation across early worlds unfolded with the same patience that shaped the land itself. As generations passed, the craft became an enduring strand woven quietly into human life. Communities refined it gently, adjusting their methods as climates shifted and landscapes changed. In fertile valleys, richer harvests influenced the sweetness of the mixtures. In colder highlands, longer waits produced deeper, earth-toned brews. Each place gave the craft a distinct character, shaped by the air it breathed, the water it gathered, and the rhythms it followed. Across these changing environments, fermentation offered small moments of comfort during difficult seasons and subtle warmth during long nights. It supported rituals without demanding attention, appeared in gatherings without dominating them, and connected distant settlements through memory alone. tools passed from one generation to another, carrying traces of ancient mixtures in their worn surfaces. Vessels inherited from elders still held the faint scent of past seasons. Through such objects, brewing became a quiet companion to the passage of time, its presence felt even when its process remained unseen. In many communities, the craft settled deeply into the rituals of daily living. It marked the transitions between planting and harvest, between hardship and rest, between the closing of one year and the beginning of the next. Its variations across regions formed a kind of map, an unspoken geography traced not by borders or written records, but by the subtle differences in taste, scent, and ceremony. Though countless traditions disappeared without leaving material traces, their influence lingered in the practices shaped by those who came after. As generations layered themselves across history, the craft did more than nourish or soothe. It encouraged attention to detail, patience in waiting, and an understanding of the delicate balance between nature and human care. It remained steady during moments of change and quiet during times of calm. Its presence echoed through ordinary days as reliably as the rising of the sun and the cooling of the night. By the time its origins sank into the soft haze of memory, fermentation had become a fundamental part of the human story, woven into identity, belief, labor, celebration, and the subtle language of shared experience. And as the quiet memories of ancient exchange fade gently into the background, the story widens into a softer and broader view. The long movement of fermentation across early worlds settles into stillness, like embers cooling at the edge of a fading fire. What began in simple vessels shaped by hand, and later traveled along slow paths of trade, migration, and seasonal gathering, now reveals its deeper presence within the human journey. It becomes clear that these early discoveries reached far beyond nourishment, shaping the rhythms of community, the patterns of ritual, and the ways in which people understood time itself. With this wider perspective settling into place, the narrative drifts naturally toward reflection, toward the enduring meaning of these ancient transformations and the quiet place they continue to hold within the long arc of human experience. As the story widens into its final quiet expanse, the slow origins of fermentation rest gently behind the horizon of time, like distant landscapes softened by evening haze. What began as a simple transformation, fruit ripening in shadow, grain softening in warm clay, honey darkening beneath layers of air, became a thread woven through the earliest human memories. Across generations, across shifting climates, across migrations that unfolded with the steady rhythm of footsteps, fermentation remained close to the heart of daily life. Its presence was never dramatic, never urgent, yet always there, quietly accompanying the rise and fall of countless seasons. In the earliest shelters where fires crackled low and steady, fermented mixtures offered small comforts during long nights when wind pressed softly against the walls. Families gathered near the warmth, the faint aroma of grain or fruit drifting from vessels that had rested for days. These early gatherings were not structured celebrations, but simple moments of closeness shaped by the gentle influence of a drink transformed by time. In such moments, fermentation served as a subtle reminder of nature's capacity to change one thing into another, to carry sweetness into warmth, and to soften the edges of otherwise difficult days. As centuries turned, the craft carried itself into rituals and ceremonies. Communities used fermented drink to mark transitions that defined their collective lives. Planting seasons, recovery after hardship, the welcoming of new life, the honoring of ancestors, the quiet farewell to those who passed into memory. The drink poured into small vessels during such moments held more than flavor. It held the echo of countless cycles, the patience of those who prepared it, the memory of hands that shaped vessels long before the present moment. In these rituals, fermentation became a symbol of continuity, connecting generations with invisible threads. In places where stone structures rose beside rivers or atop hills, fermented beverages accompanied gatherings more formal yet still quiet in nature. Leaders, elders, and ritual keepers consumed the drink not for excess or indulgence, but for its role in grounding ceremonies with warmth and familiarity. The vessels used in these spaces, often polished or adorned with careful markings, reflected a sense of reverence. Their surfaces held patterns shaped by artisans who understood the significance of the craft within the lives of their people. The drink inside these vessels became part of the landscape of leadership and tradition, entering the chambers where decisions were made and stories preserved. As migrations carried communities toward new territories, fermentation traveled with them in memory and in practice. Jars shaped from unfamiliar clay, fruit harvested from unrecognized trees, water drawn from streams with different mineral scents, all contributed to variations in taste and texture. Yet these differences did not separate people from their ancestry. Instead, they invited reflection. Each new brew reminded communities of their past, their journeys, and the landscapes they had once called home. Through such connections, fermentation became a quiet vessel of cultural identity, carrying echoes of distant regions across vast distances. Even when entire settlements faded into quiet ruin, walls collapsing into softened mounds, hearths buried beneath layers of soot and soil, traces of fermentation remained in the earth. Residues preserved inside broken pottery offered a whisper of the lives once lived there. For archaeologists who uncovered these fragments thousands of years later, the evidence served as a gentle reminder of how deeply fermented mixtures shaped early existence. These findings revealed the care, patience, and simple curiosity that guided humanity's earliest interactions with natural transformation, reminding modern eyes that much of human history unfolded not through abrupt change, but through slow, attentive relationship with the land. Across all eras, fermentation mirrored the steady rhythms of the world itself. Just as seasons shifted from warmth to cold, just as rivers rose and receded, just as trees blossomed, then shed their leaves, the transformation inside jars and vessels followed patterns shaped by patience. Time itself became an ingredient, merging with fruit, grain, honey, and water. This quiet cooperation between nature and human intention created something greater than its parts, something that carried comfort, warmth, and symbolism into the heart of daily life. The gentle sway of these patterns influenced not only physical well-being, but the deeper layers of perception. Communities learned to observe small details. The moment a mixture darkened in color, the subtle change in scent as fermentation deepened, the way warmth collected beneath earthen vessels placed near a fire. These observations nurtured an early understanding of natural cycles, teaching that the world itself transformed constantly in ways that could be guided, respected, or simply noticed. In this way, fermentation contributed to the earliest forms of knowledge shaped not by writing, but by experience and intuition. Through its slow evolution, the craft became a companion to reflection. In quiet moments, at the end of a long day, beside the glow of embers, people shared fermented drink while recounting stories of seasons past. These stories carried memories of ancestors, landscapes, and journeys. The drink served not as a catalyst for excitement, but as a gentle anchor grounding the conversation in warmth and familiarity. In this setting, storytelling became a method of preserving history, passing wisdom, and strengthening connections among those who sat together in stillness. Over time, fermentation revealed a simple truth: that transformation is a natural part of existence. Just as mixtures changed slowly inside their containers, so did communities change across generations. The land reshaped itself through cycles of growth and decay. Tools evolved as hands learned new techniques. Beliefs shifted as experiences accumulated. The gentle transformations of fermentation reflected these larger patterns, reminding early people that change could occur not only through dramatic force, but through quiet persistence. As the craft continued its journey through centuries and continents, it remained close to the core of human experience. It accompanied celebrations, marked transitions, supported rituals, and softened the edges of hardship. It offered both nourishment and contemplation, shaped by the patience of those who prepared it and the natural processes that guided its development. Though countless variations emerged, the essence remained constant, a union between time, environment, and human care. And in this broad, reflective light, the story now prepares to drift into its final contemplation: how the ancient craft, born in the simplest of conditions, continues to echo softly across the modern world, carrying with it the quiet wisdom of generations long past. As the long arc of fermentation's history settles into its final stillness, the craft reveals itself not only as a practical discovery, but as a quiet mirror reflecting the broader patterns of human life. For thousands of years, transformation took place inside clay vessels, just as it did within the communities that shaped them. The mixtures resting in shadowed corners responded to warmth, time, and gentle attention, much like the stories and traditions passed between generations. Both followed the same rhythm: patient, unhurried, and deeply rooted in the natural world. Through its subtle presence, fermentation taught early communities to trust the process of gradual change. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, simply a collaboration between human care and the unseen forces active in the environment. This understanding shaped how people approached the land they cultivated, the rituals they observed, and the relationships they nurtured. Just as a vessel required the right balance of ingredients, warmth, and time, so did the communities that surrounded it. The parallel became a quiet lesson, repeated through the centuries, offering reassurance during moments of uncertainty and continuity during times of growth. Even as cultures expanded, merged, or faded into the quiet layers of memory, fermentation remained constant. Its simplicity protected it from disappearance. A handful of grain, a cluster of fruit, a fragment of honeycomb, each held the potential to begin the transformation anew. Because of this, the craft carried forward even through upheaval, migration, and change. It traveled with families seeking new lands, with traders navigating distant routes, and with rituals maintained by generations of careful hands. In this way, fermentation acted as a thread binding together eras otherwise separated by time and distance. In the modern age, the vessels may have changed, and the methods may have grown more refined, yet the essence remains the same. Within every fermentation rests the echo of ancient hands stirring mixtures under firelight, of families gathering beside simple shelters, of early brewers learning by watching rather than speaking. The continuity offers a quiet reminder that beneath the complexity of contemporary life, something ancient persists, something shaped by patience, observation, and a harmonious relationship with the natural world. And as this long journey comes to rest, fermentation stands not as a single discovery, but as a reflection of humanity's enduring bond with transformation itself. It embodies the gentle truth that the world is always changing, and that even the smallest, slowest processes can carry profound meaning. Just as early communities found warmth and comfort in shared drink, so too does the craft continue to offer a sense of connection, a link between the distant past, the present moment, and the uncounted seasons yet to come. In this peaceful recognition, the story drifts into its quiet conclusion, leaving behind an image of clay vessels resting in soft shadow, mixtures settling in their patient rhythms, and the timeless understanding that even the simplest processes can hold within them the full span of human experience. As the reflection settles into silence, the long path of fermentation remains gently illuminated, its presence lingering like the last warmth of embers beneath cooling ash. The ancient transformations unfolding in clay jars and quiet corners continue to echo softly across time, reminding the present world of the quiet patience that shaped so many early lives. Across forgotten settlements and distant landscapes, the craft carried comfort, connection, and continuity, drawing communities together in moments of calm, gathering, and slow reflection. In the stillness of this closing moment, the vessels of memory remain unbroken. The stories of early brewers, the traces preserved in buried pottery, the rituals formed in shadows of firelight, all drift together into a single, steady impression of humanity's long relationship with change. Nothing grand, nothing sudden, only a gentle unfolding shaped by seasons, hands, and time. And as the narrative fades, the ancient rhythm continues, soft reminder that transformation endures quietly, waiting in the background of every era, warming the spaces where people gather and guiding the slow, steady current of life forward into the night.